what I'm doing here went national a couple days ago, and I was nicknamed Paul Revere, and to try to sound the warning of what's coming, or what could come, if nothing is done to intervene. By the way, I'm glad to provide the organizer of this meeting a copy of the PowerPoint, because everything that I talk about tonight has links and sources, and you can go back and look them up if you wish. I'll be glad to leave it. The information is for you to learn from. And this quote: as American citizens, the only antidote to this relentless campaign of disinformation, distraction, and deception. Have we been getting disinformation, distraction, and deception lately? Yes, we have, haven't we? In fact, it's getting more intense all the time. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Generally, the media only reports about 10% of what's actually happening in our country, and of that 10%, they usually manage to mess up about 90% of it. And so most of what's really going on is under the surface, and then what we do see is usually completely distorted. We have to stay constantly engaged, remain ever vigilant and alert, and keep our eyes fixed on the values embedded in our founding document, the Constitution. This sounds like a Tea Party platform, doesn't it? No longer can we indulge in the passive assumption that our government is entirely benign, deriving its just powers from the consent of the governed, nor can we safely presume that our current form of government could never become destructive of these ends. Would you say that was true as well? This was actually something that I wrote on April 1st, 2015 in an article called An Analysis of President Obama's Middle East Policy, the Blind Misleading the Blind. Now, I was still active duty at this time, but at the point when I wrote this article, you notice it doesn't have my name on it there. Oh, I did use my real name, but for about 8 years I wrote under a pen name. Bruce Phillips, which is really just my name reversed. My name is Philip Bruce Haney. So I created a persona because I was investigated by my own agency for an open source article that I wrote in 2006 called Green Tide Rising, Hamas Ascends. And I was turned in by the CIA. They said that no one could have written an article like that without having access to classified information, that I was guilty of unethical use of classified information, without ever actually asking me how I came to the conclusions that I laid out in the article, which, by the way, is still on the web. If you were to go and read it, Green Tide Rising, Hamas Ascends, you'd find that it could have been written yesterday. It still holds water after more than 10 years. It was written in March of 2006. So rather than debate the fine points of the First Amendment with the federal government, I just created a different persona, and I wrote under a pen name. And this fella here, Rich Swire, is one of the people that published my articles while this long period of time, because I did not want to have a dark black hole for how long this was going to go on without any commentary that I published on current events. So that was the remedy. I just wrote under a pen name, and so I have a whole archive of articles that I wrote under Bruce Phillips. But this one I wrote in my own name. And so you can look this up and read about why I wrote that the blind were misleading the blind. And this word here is Hamas, and this is kind of a touch point with Farah's presentation. Who is that mystery woman? What do we know about her? And then you look around at the environment. What kind of a neighborhood does that look to be? Detroit, huh? But anyway, she's a mystery, isn't she? And that's that's kind of an allegory of Islam itself. These people are hidden behind shadows and veils. And yet at the same time, if we know what we're looking at, you can see what they actually are, Hamas. This is our, well, that's another point. Are we sure that it's a woman? We assume so, and it probably is, however. That is a good observation, because when you're a black hole in space, it's really hard to tell anything. There's no personality there. The only indicator is that she seems to be going somewhere, but we don't really know where. And she's covered up in broad daylight.
High heels give her away.
What?
I said the high heels give her away.
Yeah, that's a pretty good, see, that's what we call in law enforcement a clue, right? And the thing is this is written on the wall in one of the suburbs or little villages of Bethlehem. It's called Beit Sahor and Beit Jala. There are two communities next to what's called Shepherd's Field in Bethlehem in Israel. And one of the olive wood carvers, we were having tea, standing out in front of his shop, sipping tea, and he said, you know, Hamas is moving into the area, and we could help them. When he said we, he meant the Christian residents of Israel, but I'm just using his words. The Americans are too stupid to know it. And that was in 2006, right about the time that I wrote the article. And I was active duty already for 3 years within the Department of Homeland Security at that time. And I'd wear a t-shirt with a stain on it, a pair of shorts, flip-flops, and a baseball hat, and schlep around in the West Bank and other places gathering intel, and nobody ever knew who I was, because I looked so completely ordinary. But I would have these conversations with people, sipping tea, and learn how valuable is information like that. That in 2006, I know already that Hamas is saturating into the villages in the West Bank, right? And now we hear about it more and more, don't we? But when I would come back to work and report for duty, I couldn't share any of the information that I gathered because the people weren't in my chain of command weren't interested in finding out what I learned when I was over in the Middle East. It was a very surreal situation, friends. In fact, they were so not interested that they ended up investigating me 9 times during the course of my career for putting information into the system that contradicted the both domestic and foreign policy of, particularly the Obama administration. What did you have? Question?
That's just living proof that it's not Republican, it's not Democrat, there is globalist.
I'm glad you brought that up. Would you like to know what I learned about swamp creatures? There are 4 major attributes of swamp creatures. My first career was an entomologist, an agricultural entomologist, so I learned how to classify things to the nth degree. The first attribute of swamp creatures is that they are mutant hybrids. They are mutants of D's, R's, and I's, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. The second thing is that they are amphibious. They can walk right out of the swamp and come and sit down right next to you, and you don't know it. And the third thing is that they have very toxic, sharp stingers, and they have a particular place that they like to sting you. Their specialty is, and would you guess where that might be? Right between your shoulder and your back. And the fourth one is kind of the strangest quality of all, and that is most of the swamp creatures have no faces. Who makes these policy decisions, and who blacks out and redacts, and who destroys, and who alters, and who deletes, and who lies and covers up? Most of the time you never know. But there are a small group of those swamp creatures that have no faces that actually do have a face, only with them, they have two faces. And you've seen a lot of the two-faced swamp creatures lately. Their names are Mueller and Brennan and Clapper and Holder and Napolitano and Johnson and Struck and Page and McCabe and individuals like that. They are the ones that have two faces, the one you see in the public, and then the one, believe me, that you do not want to see behind the wall, protective walls of the agencies that they work for. And by God's design and combination of that and my background, I became a founding member of the Department of Homeland Security. I was there from the very first day after 9/11, and I saw the growth of these destructive, coercive, corrupted policies that brought individuals into places of influence and authority, while law enforcement officers like myself were upholding our oath and doing the best that we could to keep them from causing harm to our national security. And rather than investigating them and following up on the information in a law enforcement basis, they created a new policy of counterterrorism called Countering Violent Extremism, and took it into the realm of civil rights and civil liberties and privacy rights instead of in law enforcement. Therefore, they had a big problem. Guys like me that were putting information into the system on individuals that Obama, for example, was bringing in to the administration, that's a pretty big problem. So how do you resolve a problem like that? The first thing that you do is you attempt to just ignore the information. A lot of that's been going on, hasn't it? The second one is a big step forward, and that is that they delete the information out of the system. Of course, like Hillary Clinton became a master at it, didn't she? And then the third one is the most malevolent and ominous of all. They go after the person that put the information in the system. So I endured all three, often simultaneously, on one or two or three different investigative cases that were going on at the same time, either by the Department of Justice, who convened a grand jury to find probable cause to indict me on criminal charges, or the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General, who investigated me and must have interviewed 200 different people in the agency, and or Customs and Border Protection Internal Affairs, who assigned their two most senior investigators, who spent 2 years tracing my emails and my phone calls and every other possible source of evidence to find at least one subclause in some provision that I had violated so that they could fire me. It's called an adverse action. And we're never successful in any of them, despite all the resources that they expended, clear up to the top level of the abilities of internal affairs investigators, and were never able to find probable cause that I had done anything wrong. But I can say that now after going through it, but at the time, there was no certainty of outcome. Because as you well know, they're perfectly capable of doing whatever they wish to do. And law and constitution are mere obstacles for them to drive over. So the fact that I survived it is really quite incredible. Even though I went through it, it still amazes me. But that's the reason why I'm here in front of you today, because what I learned through all of that is a valuable lesson that I offer for free to my fellow Americans as I travel around, and that is the concept of sovereignty. It's more fundamental than the Constitution itself because it has to do with the form of government that we choose to live under, rather than having it imposed on us either through deception and or force and coercion. And that sovereignty that is endowed to us by our Creator is defined by the Constitution. Not subjective terms, like diversity and inclusion and fairness and equality, at least as the left defines it, and or a very, very objective standard of sovereignty or definition, what we've been talking about now called Sharia, which after all is what Sharia is a definition of sovereignty according to Allah, and that it should be imposed on everybody in the world. So you've probably been reading through this. I put this up there because there's a lot of evidence that these organizations that are operating openly within the United States, of whom you have representatives right here in Michigan that get lots and lots of FaceTime on the media and TV and radio, are actually members of Hamas. And we've known it for 10 years. It wasn't a definition that I came up with, it was proven in federal court by the Department of Justice and concluded Holy Land Foundation trial in November 2008, which means for almost 10 years, our elected officials have been abrogating their constitutional duty, putting our country at risk because they've been openly recruiting members of these organizations and of Muslim Brotherhood front groups into positions of authority within the federal government, which now you can see why I would get in so much trouble, right? Because I was interfering with this grand plan of theirs. So there is some remedy, there's some hope. July 11th, the House Committee on Government Oversight and Reform, Subcommittee National Security, held a hearing about designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. We're closer to it now than we have been since at least 2006. Remember the article I mentioned, Green Tide Rising? That's when things started going sideways. Right about then. The last half of President Bush's second term is when things started going bad. And basically the MAGA car, the Make America Great car, went off the road. It slid sideways in the ice and went right into the ditch. And it's been sitting down there halfway on its side for the last, how long has it been now? 12 years? But now there's a tow truck with the Trump Towing Company on the side of the truck who's grabbed a hold of it and pulled that car up out of the ditch. And it's a sturdy, well-built car. And we're about to turn the key on. And if we can get that MAGA car over the November finish line, you're going to see Trump version 2 after November. Because this is a mandate on his presidency as well as the elections at the local and state level.
So this isn't all on Obama's watch.
Most of it, yeah, 95% of it. This here is on President Trump's watch. This hearing. So, I brought my trusty can of spinach. See? People always say, Mr. Haney, what can we do? And I will tell you exactly what to do. I want you to go to Walmart and buy a case of spinach because it's time to open a can. Wouldn't you agree? Don't you feel this way? And this is where the of, for, and by the people government comes in, is here. So that's that's what I want you to do. So Paul Revere is telling you to be like Popeye and open a can of spinach.
We're up against Buddhists.
So here's the subject that really at hand. What I've been talking about so far is just a little bit of background. And now I'm going to focus very specifically, like a 100-power microscope. Remember, I was an entomologist, on Abdul al-Sayed. So what we're going to do is just put it in chronological order when this stuff started happening, meaning like the submarine began to emerge up out of the water. When you started hearing the word Abdul al-Sayed, a Muslim candidate for governor in Michigan. And one of the threads that's going to be woven through this fabric is this woman named Linda Sarsour, who Farah already mentioned before. she's basically the face of the Islamic Society of North America, and she also speaks quite a bit at CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, and she's also a co-founder of the Women's March that is right now calling for the abolition of ICE. So she's involved in both leftist causes and in the promotion of Sharia law. And you might say, well, how can she do both? Aren't they contradictory? Well, she was given permission along with the entire Muslim community of America to form alliances with Antifa progressive leftist socialist groups, whom I call the Apples. They call themselves all those names, so I just came up with an acronym. The Green Islamic Movement is allied with the Apple Movement, and they are finding ways to what it says in the Declaration, alter or abolish the current form of government, that's exactly what it says, and replace it with one as more suitable to their worldview. Wouldn't you agree that's what they're trying to do? It's called hope and change, right? Fundamentally transform America. According to the Declaration, is alter or abolish, and replace it with either Sharia, which she's promoting here, and this is January of 17, about a year and a half ago, and or the diversity, inclusion, fairness, and equality formula that the Apples promote as superior to a constitutional-based form of government and free enterprise.
Is their movement more so of a political one than a religious?
You mean on which side?
On her side.
No, she's allied. She's like a chameleon. She takes the shape, but it's not really her truth. She's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Is that, yeah.
But couldn't you say that Islam is more of a political movement than a religious one?
Well, it's both. Yeah, because in terms of the spectrum of influence of Sharia law, it goes all the way from one end of the spectrum in the faith, all the way to the other end of the spectrum in the civil law and life. So it has to do with civil law, marriage, divorce, family, property, business, and also in the faith arena as well. It's very, very precise. It tells you what foot you can walk into the bathroom with, how you clean yourself after you go to the bathroom, your relations with your husband or wife in very, very extremely explicit detail. There's nothing that's left out. All we're doing now is just walking right through in chronological order to kind of give you a reminder of how this story began and how it got to where we are today. So he's been called late. He was called initially the next Obama, but I think they realized that that's not necessarily an asset. And so they haven't been emphasizing it lately, have they?
I like his wife's headdress.
Yeah, very nice. And here's one of those pictures worth 1,000 words. This is in June of 2017, just a little bit over a year, when Linda Sarsour endorsed Abdul Al-Sayed at the Islamic Society of North American. Who was it that said that you went?
Yeah.
Annual meeting, and that year was in Chicago. And she made a speech in public and endorsed him and called on the community in America to support him financially. This is Hamas, friends, endorsing Hamas. She's Hamas and he's Hamas. That's a bold statement, Mr. Haney. Can you really back that up? Well, I showed you already earlier that they've already been irrefutably tied to support of Hamas. Why don't we just take the evidence that we have and act on it rather than constantly trying to cover it up?
I'm just wondering, was it your documentation that Patrick Kovic used to make his accusations against Al-Sayed?
I can neither confirm or deny. You notice that I don't endorse a candidate in public because I don't want to be seen as a partisan, except for one kind of a partisan. And that I don't mind. In fact, I'd encourage all of you to become that, and that is a constitutional partisan. We can all do that. Because if I was actually branded as a political partisan, it would cut off about half of the possible arenas that I'm able to speak in. I can speak in law enforcement, my background, political, kind of like tonight. This is mostly a political. There's also the social arena that includes faith community. And so I'm able to navigate through all three, like riding my Paul Revere horse and speak from one day to the next in a real kaleidoscope of different groups without people being worried about whether I'm going to be promoting a particular candidate or position or platform, because what I talk about is sovereignty and the Constitution, and why this threat and the apples, how they're trying to undermine the Constitution. That will work wherever you speak. This is just another picture with Miss Linda, and you see how arrogant they are. Are we bona fide enough? No Muslim ban ever. This is right about the time that the second edition of the executive order was issued by President Trump, and they're telling the Islamic world, why do you suppose they write it in English, by the way? See, there's a lot of indicators in this picture that are really valuable in terms of intelligence. They're aiming their message at a particular audience, which is the West. And they're telling them that we're bona fide. In other words, we're going to come whether you allow us or not. That's our intention. And we're not going to let immigration law or the President of the United States tell us what to do. The guy on the right is Yasser Qadi. He's affiliated with the great branch of Islam from the Indian subcontinent that speaks Pashtun and Urdu. The guy in the middle is named Nihad Awad. He's the founder of CARE. And we have known since 1993 that he was a Hamas operative, and he is still operating in broad daylight in the political, social, and law enforcement arena of our society. After President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital on the 6th of December 2017, the U.S. Council on Muslim Organizations held a rally on the south ellipse of the Capitol. And all of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood front groups in the United States gathered together in one afternoon on a stage. I disguised myself and I went to the meeting. And I literally stood less than an arm's length right next to Nihad Awad and the leader of ISNA and CARE and one of the relatives of Erdogan from Turkey, who were all shouting slogans like, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." When I was in high school, I took shorthand. I was the only boy in a class of 17 girls, and I never went out on a date with any of them. So that tells you what a nerd I really was. However, I learned shorthand quite well. And while they were shouting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," I was writing all the slogans that they were saying on the back of one of their posters in shorthand, writing everything that they said. And that has been a handy skill for me many times, being able to write down everything that people say. And it really bothers them when they're watching you do it. "What are you writing, Haney?" Well, actually, I'm writing everything that you're saying down. So there you go. That is the poster of the Muslim Brotherhood Network in the United States, right there. The new face, the older generation, and the Asian subcontinent. And this is just some background on when he began emerging as a candidate. And she said, "When I think about building power, I think about brothers like Abdul Sayed, who is in this room today, who is running to become the first Muslim governor of the state of Michigan." These guys were blatant. And see, this is why they should have been shut down a long time ago, because they don't really have a constitutional right to operate in our arena while they're promoting another form of law, meaning Sharia, which is a direct violation of Article 6 of the Constitution. So not only are they Hamas in red and white and blue, but they're all also openly promoting the overthrow of the Constitution.
Is it true that George Soros is funding El Sayed?
Yes.
Well, I don't know for certain. I don't really focus on the red side of the equation so much. I know that the Antifa progressive leftist socialists are out there and that they form an alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood, but they're very well funded as well. And I'm not as concerned, particularly at this moment, where the source of funding comes from is so much as the fact that they're here and they're going forward. So here's some more information about Abdul al-Sayed, proving that he really is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. No matter how many times he tries to deny it, he is. He was MSA Vice President, Muslim Students Association, when he was at U of M. He is endorsed by Linda Sarsour, who is Muslim Brotherhood. And his father-in-law, to this very day, is Vice President of CARE Michigan, as we speak. So he has affiliations connecting the Muslim Brotherhood through the Muslim students, through CARE, and through ISNA. And they say, what, 3 strikes, you're out? Now here's Linda again. What she's doing is putting a face on this political movement, because she has a big platform and she gets a lot of face time in the media. And for some strange reason, she's adored by the mainstream media. Do what? Well, she wears a lot of different colors. That one, green, of course, is a symbol of Islam. And then I decided that I would address it as a law enforcement officer and intelligence officer. And I wrote an analysis of everything that she said on July 26th, almost exactly a year ago, right? What's the date today?
27th.
A year ago and a day, I wrote this, and what I did is I collected everything that she'd ever said, and then I must have listened to her speech at the ISNA about 50 times. And I wanted to make sure that every comma and every dot and every cross was exactly where it's supposed to be. And I walked through her entire speech and pulled all the threads from the Quran and the Hadith out of her speech and analyzed it. And I call it Thank You, Linda Sarsour, because basically she took us through the veil into the other side to allow us to see what their world really looks like. She called for jihad against President Trump. Did you hear what I said?
Yeah, that's not too surprising.
I don't think she better try it.
Yeah.
Once Linda gets,
Because if she does, somebody's going to open a can of spinach.
once Linda gets Sharia law instituted in the United States, are women still going to be able to drive a car, get an education,
I think
and
last question
walk
was,
freely?
Yeah.
Yes, sir?
Mr. Haney, I was thinking, Timothy King, Washtenaw County Republican Party. I'm also a member of the Willow Tea Party here. I was thinking one thing with this, with you going out and spreading the word and educating the community on what's going on, and people like Trevor Loudon, who have wrote the book, The Enemy Within. We see that they have infiltrated the Democratic Party. And it is so important with what you said is so important, especially what's the primaries in November. After that, I believe the president is going to drain the swamp. There's a lot of draining that needs to be done in D.C.
It's not the swamp as much as the creatures that are in it. he said they were going to drain the swamp, and I said, yeah, it's not the swamp water that's so bad, although it is very toxic. It's the creatures that live in it. And they're not going to give up without you're not going to land a 50-pound fish without a fight. So let's carry on. December 16th, we're almost into 2018. Here's just one more event in a sequence of events. What I'm doing is providing you an archive to show you that this isn't something that just popped up like a mushroom, but it's been developing for over quite some time. And it has the backing and the endorsement of the entire American Muslim community and the whole international Muslim community. When you saw what President Obama did when he brought all these Muslim people into the administration, kind of like a magnet drawing iron, if Abdul Said was elected, he would do exactly the same thing. And Michigan will become a roosting place, like a pigeon coop, of all these people from all over the United States who are going to come here and under the protective roof of the government of Michigan promote their Islamic worldview. And there's not very much you'll be able to do about it without stepping it up a whole nother level, which I don't think that the Americans are really ready to do. What is enough, by the way? 9/11 wasn't enough, was it? Fort Hood, Boston, San Bernardino, Orlando, Chattanooga, Fort Lauderdale, they weren't enough. When you say enough is enough, when Popeye said, I stands all I can stand, whatever enough is, we haven't got there yet. Because if the equation of political correctness, and then on the other side of the equation is terrorism, political correctness is greater of importance than terrorism. It's obvious when you put it like that. It's not even equal. Political correctness is not even equal to the concern about terrorism. It's greater than. And the day comes when that equation flips, and that political correctness is less important than concern about terrorism, then you will know it, that we're actually serious about protecting our national security. But whatever the power and force and whatever is necessary to flip that equation, apparently we haven't got there yet, because actions do speak louder than words, don't they? Let me carry on and then hold your question, would you?
Okay.
And I'll ask him after.
Please.
Here is in December 17th, and here's when Linda Sarsour came with Bernie Sanders founder Winnie Wong to Michigan and began endorsing Abdul's candidacy. Again, we're talking about history here, friends. History happens right in front of you, and it'll walk right by you if you're not careful. So that's what I'm trying to do, is bring you up to speed on what has actually happened here in Michigan. Here's December 27th. He's with Linda Sarsour. This is the same event. They're on the stage there. Now enter Dawood Waleed. You've heard of him, haven't you? Executive Director of CARE Michigan. I know him quite well. I know you can't read all that, but the point is it's an Arab American editorial published on April 14th, 2018, and down in the blue part it says, so yes, there has been the implementation of Sharia law in Michigan for more than a century. This was a big tactical error on his part, because normally they will never admit that they're actually trying to implement Sharia law. But as the Executive Director of CARE Michigan, for him to come out and say it publicly, from a tactical law enforcement perspective, that means that they think that it's time for them to set up to take the next step forward. And what is the next step? From denial, the next step is normalization. What they're attempting to do is normalize Sharia law in Michigan. But in order to normalize it, they have to do one other thing. They have to marginalize anyone who opposes it, which is exactly what the Obama administration did to people like myself. In order to normalize bringing known jihadis and terrorists into the country and working with them to develop policy, they had to marginalize the people that stood in the way. So what happened at the federal level has seeped its way down into the state level, and what you're seeing is played out right in front of you in this electoral campaign. And don't think for a minute that if he were successful that he wouldn't continue operating in that model. He would do exactly what President Obama did. He would saturate his administration with fellow travelers and implement Sharia law or protect it or apologize for it or however you want to put it. Democratic candidate for governor and who are his friends and supporters. Now finally somebody's starting to pay attention and start sounding the alarm that Michigan, please wake up. This is United West from Florida. Keep your ears out for some things coming down the road from this organization. That's just a hint. Democratic hopeful wants Michigan to be a sanctuary state. Why are sanctuary cities illegal according to the Constitution? Because according to the 14th Amendment, no state can pass a law that gives favor to one group while abrogating the rights and privileges of the citizens of the country. And if you give special treatment or consideration to one class of citizens at the expense of another, that's unconstitutional. The only thing is that we haven't managed to push the case all the way forward to the Supreme Court yet. But eventually that trigger will be pulled, and then just like they did with the executive order based on 8 U.S.C. 1182, which states plainly that President Trump has the authority to refuse entry to any group of people from any country, they will find and rule on the 14th Amendment that sanctuary cities are illegal, unconstitutional. So you have a candidate who's running a platform that's completely unconstitutional. And yet, sadly, our fellow Americans are virtually illiterate when it comes to the Constitution. And so that's what one of the things I've been trying to do is encourage people to become more fluent in the language of the Constitution, and that whatever position you take or argument that you make, that you should be able to literally cite chapter and verse from the Constitution. And this is why I make my stand on this provision or that provision, and to be able to do it. Why is Sharia law illegal? According to the Constitution, Article 6. The U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and the judges of each state should be bound thereby. And why are sanctuary cities illegal according to the Constitution? Article 14, Amendment 14 prohibits implementation of law that abridges or abrogates the rights of U.S. citizens.
Has any side publicly taken a stand on Sharia?
No, others do it for him, like Dawood Walid. All he did say is coming up. And then so, just like I did with Linda Sarsour, I dissected Dawood Walid on April 25th, and I asked him 27 questions about his editorial that I showed you earlier, and pulled the threads of the Quran out of his editorial and laid it out like really like a dissection. Of course, he hasn't answered me. But the reason why I know these guys so well is because I tracked them when I was active duty in law enforcement, Customs and Border Protection. And Dawood, for example, sued me when I was still active duty for discrimination, racism, and bias against an imam in Canton, Michigan, named Ali Suleiman Ali. And I'm not spilling classified beans because it's a public case. It's called the Cherry case, Cherri. And I'm named as a principal plaintiff in it. No, defendant in it. And Dawood Walid and Suleiman Ali sued CBP at the encouragement of CBP. My own agency encouraged Hamas to sue one of their officers. They didn't back me up, they backed them up. And then here's the Bridges meetings. What we're talking about, friends, is saturation of the Muslim Brotherhood into the fabric of our social structure. In this case, it's law enforcement. And FBI was already prohibited since 2008 of interacting with CARE or Muslim Brotherhood, but they do it anyway. And Dawood Walid sits right there in the meeting representing CARE with federal law enforcement officers who should know that that man represents Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're sitting right in there. Islamophobia, you heard about this one probably during the debate before the Michigan Press Corps, when Abdul al-Sayed said, you might say that you love Muslims, but I can tell you that Muslims really hate you. And what if Patrick Colbeck had said, you might say you love Americans, but I can tell you that Americans really hate you? Do you think he would have been banned from the party? So why do we allow this double standard? What is that strange incoherence that we have that makes us paralyzed and incapable of responding to a comment like that simply because, after all, he's a Muslim? What it is fear. Fear of being sued, fear of being called an Islamophobe, fear of one thing or another, but not enough courage to stand up as an antidote to that fear and stand up for the Constitution. We have way too many politicians and not enough statesmen. Politicians are simply salesmen. And what do they sell? Themselves. And then when they get to the position they sold themselves to, you find out they're really not competent. And they compromise and they remain as salesmen. Whereas a statesman bases his position on the Constitution and stands up for it no matter what the opposition might be.
And that's in the man of Patrick Colbeck.
You said it. You're right, he's a good one. So I just went back right, here's that statement from May 10th. Michigan Press Corps, it's not like he said it in a small room like this. He said it in front of the entire Michigan Press Corps. And there was Virgil Bueller, remember Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Bueller? Nobody said a word. He's running his campaign on the middle finger to Trump. Now, is that the quality of a chief executive? That you're going to blurt out like a child that I'm going to run my campaign as a middle finger to Trump. And that he's going to undo, I heard him on the radio 3 or 4 days ago, undo everything that President Trump has done. That's his position. Here's Colbeck accusing al-Sayed of playing the race car. See, this drama's been going on for some time, but we're getting used. Here's Dawood Walid. I mentioned him earlier. These are the faces to attach to these abstract concepts. These are the people that are pushing forward like water. When water meets an obstacle, what will water do? It goes under it, right? Over it, around it, or through it. And Islam is just like water. You put an obstacle in the way of it, and if it's got enough of a supply of water, it will keep pushing against the obstacle till it does something. So the question is, how do you make a protective barrier against the influence, the water of Islam? It's called the Constitution. It's a stronger wall than any physical wall that we could ever build. Our forefathers really were geniuses.
Yeah, they were.
They foresaw. Now we're coming up to real modern time, or current time. Ocasio-Cortez, she's on the road right now here in Michigan at 4 different appearances endorsing al-Sayed.
What about Shree? Nobody loves him.
Well, what about him? I mean, his commercials are entertaining, but
Well, isn't he a better choice for people
Oh,
who don't wanna vote?
any normal leftist, as far as I'm concerned, we're familiar with them. But you put somebody like Al-Sayed into position of influence and authority, you're gonna see something completely different. So she's endorsing him. She's traveling in the state right now. She wants to abolish ICE, which would create anarchy. Here's Linda Sarsour. They were arrested in the Hart Senate building, about 650 women, for protesting illegally inside the building and shouting to abolish ICE. And I just thought about her expression. She looks like an angel, doesn't she? She looks as content and happy and satisfied because she's getting all these women to do exactly the best possible thing that they could do, create chaos and anarchy. And here's where Ocasio endorsed him, July 2nd. Here's his platform. Tuition-free college. Why does college have to be free anyway? Meaning,
They don't teach anything.
So just, the University of Michigan will just stop charging.
that's right. And then money out of politics. I like that one the best. Now here's a Democratic fundraiser he had. We'll see his shirt, abolish ICE. Yes. So everybody's on the abolish ICE bandwagon. I'm all for free speech. In my opinion, let them keep talking. Because the more they keep promoting this policy, the further away from the center they're going to get, and the farther away from any grasping any possible victory they're going to get. Because what is the real fundamental driving gravitational force of this current election? It's called the economy. What was the number today?
4.1.
Right, and where are we in the fiscal year? We're at the end of July. You realize we don't have very long left. The primary is just in a couple of weeks. But if the economy stays strong, what argument are the Democrats going to possibly offer the American public that is going to be stronger in appeal than the economy? There isn't one.
And that's why I say it's a gamble, but I think our best shot is against Al-Sayed.
And then here's another article about his alliance with the man named Muhammad al-Alahi. He's a Shia. He's pro-Hezbollah and pro-Iran. So Abdul Assad's taking money from the Muslim Brotherhood and support from the leftists and from the Shia side of the equation as well.
What about Russia?
What do you mean? What about Russia?
Russia can't involve everybody else in the world from this guy.
That's what you call putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable. So I was talking about money and the Muslim Brotherhood front groups. The very first guy at the top of the list is Caucus. He is Abdul al-Sayed's father-in-law, who's vice president of CARE. And now look at the groups. You've got CARE in the middle there. See the names of the groups: CARE, Muslim American Society, Muslim Public Affairs Council, and ISNA. The whole constellation of Muslim Brotherhood front groups are funding al-Sayed's campaign. These are all Hamas, proven more than 10 years ago, and yet here it is being done right in front of us. By the Department of Justice, by the way, and has never been refuted in court for the last 10 years. They are part of Hamas, which is a globally designated terrorist organization. Remember I showed you the very first slide or so with the Arabic on the wall? It's not over there, it's here. And who is that mystery woman? Somebody that's running for the governor. We don't know any more about him and who he really is than we do about the woman in the niqab, all dressed in all black. And by the way, in case you want to see it in visual format, Nihadawad on the left, Dawood Walid number 3, yes, and Jesse Jackson, the Rainbow Push Coalition, and over on the right is the man who is Abdul al-Sayed's father-in-law. Right there. That's from 2010. 2 years after the Holy Land Foundation trial. This is 7 years after DHS is funded. We've known that, and yet DHS, which was founded to prevent terrorism in America, allows these individuals to continue operating in the public arena. And anybody like myself who tried to put the information in, they came after us and investigated us. Not them, us. And here's today's polls. I'm not big on polls, but that's the numbers for right now.
Oh, wow, Al-Sayed's in last. You can't trust the polls.
And then, yeah, see, polls are like potato chips. You start eating them and you can't stop. So here is Bernie Sanders, good old Bernie. He's now endorsed Al-Sayed. This is just a couple days ago. So remember what I said about a convergence? You're seeing the convergence. So stay awake in the next couple weeks, and you're going to see some real fireworks. And then that's the same thing, something about the poll. And here's another nice, slick PR endorsement from Ocasio-Cortez.
New York State.
Right, and if you accept an endorsement from somebody, what does that mean by default? That you accept everything that they stand for, right?
Who is Alexandria? Who is she?
Who? This lady? She won in Queens in New York. She upset one of the number 4 guy in the hierarchy of the Democratic Party.
That was a real
On
upset.
something like 27,000 votes.
He would have been expected to be their next speaker.
Yep. Okay, and this just came out today. So I brought you right up to current time. Very well written analysis from the Institute for, what's the PT? I forgot. But anyway, you can
Investigative Project on Terrorism.
Investigative Project on Terrorism. And here's right off of his website. I went on Facebook today and looked it up. And here are the Ocasio-Cortez events, the 4 of them. Ottawa Ferris Wheel Student Center, that's going to be at Wayne State. And then one right here in Ypsilanti on Sunday. Here. At the A&E Church.
At the church?
Yes.
What street?
I think it's on Michigan Avenue.
On Michigan Avenue.
And here's the marker for it. And look at the groups that are backing him up. Michigan for Revolution.
Yeah.
Millennials for Revolution. Ann Arbor for Revolution. Progressive Caucus. Demand Universal Health Care. Abdul al-Sayed and the Michigan Nurses Association. Wow. So that's coming up in about a day and a half.
That's in Ypsilanti.
Yep.
That's right down the street.
And that would be my final slide. And so, I guess, are we going to have questions?
Questions and answers. If